What happens when human error collides with our own technology in the most catastrophic way? These aren't acts of nature. These are disasters born from mistakes, negligence, and sometimes sheer arrogance. We're going to explore 8 of the deadliest in history, ranked by their devastating human cost. From the smoldering ruins of a post-Civil War city to the silent, toxic cloud that swept over a sleeping population, these events are horrifying reminders of our own fallibility. Each story is a lesson, written in tragedy, about the real price of cutting corners and the responsibility we have to put safety above all else. Number 8. The Sampoong department store collapse. 1995. Our countdown begins in Seoul, South Korea on June 29, 1995. The Sampoong department store was a symbol of the nation's booming prosperity, a luxurious landmark in the affluent Gangnam district. But behind its glittering facade, a foundation of greed and criminal negligence was about to give way. The building was a disaster from its very conception. Originally designed as a 4-story office building, the owner, Lee Jun, illegally added a 5th floor to turn it into a department store. To maximize retail space, he ordered crucial support columns to be thinned or removed entirely to make way for escalators. The final fatal blow came when 3 massive, heavy air conditioning units were installed on the roof, which was never designed to support their weight. When these units were later dragged across the delicate rooftop, it created deep structural cracks. On the morning of the collapse, those cracks were widening rapidly. The ceiling on the 5th floor was visibly sagging. Store managers were warned that the building was on the verge of catastrophic failure. Their response? They closed the top floor but refused to shut down the store or evacuate the thousands of shoppers inside. The day's revenue was too high to lose. At 5:52 p.m., the building gave up. In less than 20 seconds, the entire south wing of the 5-story building pancaked into the basement, trapping over 1,500 people inside. The collapse killed 502 people and injured more than 900, making it the deadliest peacetime disaster in South Korean history. Investigators discovered a building so compromised by illegal modifications and cost-cutting that it was doomed from the start. A tragedy born not from a single error, but from a deliberate and staggering disregard for human life. Number 7. The Port Chicago Disaster, 1944. Coming in at number 7 is the deadliest homefront disaster of World War II. An event that exposed a deep racial injustice at the heart of the U.S. military. The night is July 17, 1944, at the Port Chicago Naval Magazine in California. The base was a critical hub for loading bombs and ammunition onto ships headed for the war in the Pacific. This relentless, dangerous work was performed almost exclusively by African American sailors. These men were given hardly any training in handling explosives. Instead, their white officers pressured them to load faster and faster, often pitting teams against each other in reckless speed contests. Under a segregated command, these sailors could serve their country, but they couldn't lead. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And at 10:18 p.m., it did. While loading the SSEA Bryan with thousands of tons of explosives, something went terribly wrong. A catastrophic explosion instantly vaporized the ship, another vessel next to it, and the pier they were tied to. The blast was so powerful it was felt in San Francisco and registered on seismographs in Nevada. In a single flash, 320 sailors and civilians were killed, and another 390 were injured. Of the dead, 202 were the African American ammunition loaders. But the tragedy didn't stop there. A month later, 258 surviving black sailors were ordered to go back to loading ammunition under the exact same unsafe conditions. Many refused. 50 of these men, who became known as the Port Chicago 50, were charged with mutiny, convicted, and sentenced to years of hard labor. The disaster and the trial that followed became a national scandal, highlighting the deadly combination of negligence and discrimination. It was a wake-up call that helped push the U.S. Navy to finally begin desegregation in 1946. Number 6. The Monongah Mining Disaster, 1907. At number 6, we head deep into a West Virginia coal mine for the worst mining disaster in U.S. history. On the morning of December 6, 1907, hundreds of men and boys descended into Fairmont Coal Company's mines number 6 and number 8. The workforce was a mosaic of the American dream, mostly recent immigrants from Italy, Hungary, and Russia, all searching for a better life. Many brought their sons and relatives with them, so the official count of who was underground that day was almost certainly wrong. Mine safety in West Virginia was notoriously poor, lagging far behind other states and European standards. Things like shielded safety lamps and testing for flammable methane gas were often ignored to save money and speed up production. Miners used open flame lamps, and ventilation was so bad that explosive coal dust and methane gas were constantly accumulating. At 10:28 a.m., 2 massive explosions ripped through the interconnected mines. The blast was so violent it shook the ground for miles, destroyed the mine's ventilation system, and caused the entrances to collapse, trapping hundreds of men and boys inside. The exact cause was never found, but it was likely a spark from an open lamp or an underground train that ignited the volatile air. At the time, there were no trained rescue teams. Miners from neighboring towns rushed to help, battling fires, cave-ins, and poisonous gas with little more than picks and shovels. The scene was one of utter carnage. They pulled out the mutilated bodies of men and boys, some as young as 8 years old. The official death toll was 362, but because so many were unlisted, the true number is believed to be over 500. The tragedy left behind 250 widows and more than 500 fatherless children, and the national outcry it caused led directly to the creation of the U.S. Bureau of Mines in 1910. Number 5. The Texas City Disaster, 1947. Number 5 on our list is one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history, an event that leveled a city and taught a terrifying lesson in chemical handling. On April 16, 1947, the port of Texas City was a hive of industry. Docked at the pier was the SS Grand Camp, a French ship being loaded with what seemed like a harmless fertilizer, ammonium nitrate. By that morning, its hold contained nearly 2,300 tons of it. Around 8 a.m., workers spotted smoke coming from the cargo hold. The crew, afraid that water would ruin the cargo, made a fatal mistake. They tried to snuff out the fire by sealing the hatches and pumping steam inside, thinking it would starve the fire of oxygen. It did the exact opposite. It concentrated the heat and pressure, turning the ship into a giant pressure cooker. Unaware of the danger, crowds gathered to watch the burning ship. The city's volunteer fire department arrived, but the ship was so hot that water vaporized on contact. At 9:12 a.m., the SS Grand Camp detonated. The explosion was immense, heard 150 miles away and strong enough to knock people off their feet in the city of Galveston. The port was simply gone. The blast ignited fires at a nearby Monsanto chemical plant, triggering a chain reaction of new explosions. To make matters worse, the blast set fire to another ship, the SS Highflyer, which was also carrying ammonium nitrate. 15 hours later, it exploded too. The entire 27-man firefighting crew was killed in the first blast, and all of the city's emergency equipment was destroyed. In total, 581 people lost their lives, and thousands more were injured. The Texas City disaster led to the first-ever class action lawsuit against the U.S. government, and resulted in sweeping new regulations for handling hazardous chemicals. These stories are hard to hear, but it's important that we don't forget them. If you believe this history matters, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us continue to bring these accounts to light. Now back to the countdown. Number 4, the Hunkaiko Colliery Explosion, 1942. At number 4 is the single deadliest mining disaster in world history, a tragedy born from the brutal reality of war and forced labor. The year is 1942. Northeastern China is under Japanese occupation. At the Hunkaiko Colliery, a coal mine in Liaoning Province, The Japanese military forced Chinese laborers to work in conditions that can only be described as slavery. The miners were prisoners, surrounded by a guarded perimeter. They were given barely enough food to survive and wore little more than rags. Disease was rampant, and Japanese overseers enforced discipline with extreme violence. Safety standards didn't exist. The mine was a tinderbox of gas and coal dust. On April 26, 1942, the inevitable happened. A gas and coal dust explosion tore through a mine shaft, sending flames bursting from the entrance. Panicked relatives rushed to the site but were held back by Japanese guards, who put up electric fences to keep them out. In a desperate and horrific attempt to contain the underground fire, the mine operators made a decision. They shut off the ventilation and sealed the entrance to the pit. They did this without evacuating the mine, trapping countless Chinese workers deep underground. While the initial blast killed some, the vast majority died slowly from carbon monoxide poisoning and suffocation, as the fire ate up all the oxygen. For 10 days, crews cleared rubble and bodies from the shaft. The Japanese initially reported a death toll of just 34. It was a blatant lie. The true number, confirmed by a Soviet investigation after the war, was staggering. 1,549 dead, including 1,518 Chinese miners. It remains the deadliest coal mining disaster ever recorded. Number 3. The Halifax Explosion, 1917. Ranking at number 3 is a disaster that produced the largest man-made explosion of the pre-atomic age, an event that wiped a city off the map in the blink of an eye. On the morning of December 6, 1917, the harbor of Halifax, Nova Scotia, was a critical port for the war in Europe, bustling with ships carrying troops, supplies, and munitions across the Atlantic. That morning, the SS Mont Blanc, a French cargo ship, was entering the harbor. Her hold was a floating bomb, packed with over 2,900 tons of high explosives, including picric acid, TNT, and highly flammable benzol, stored in barrels on the deck. At the same time, a Norwegian vessel, the SS Imo, was leaving the harbor, traveling too fast and on the wrong side of the channel. Around 8:45 a.m., the two ships collided. The impact itself was minor, but it was enough to topple the barrels of benzol, spilling the volatile fuel across the Mont Blanc's deck. Sparks from the grinding metal ignited the vapors, and a fire erupted instantly. The crew of the Mont Blanc, knowing their cargo was about to blow, abandoned ship and tried desperately to warn others, but their shouts went unheard. For 20 minutes, the burning ship drifted toward the shore, a terrifying spectacle for the crowds who gathered along the waterfront to watch. At 9:35 a.m., the Mont Blanc exploded. The force was unimaginable, equal to 2.9 kilotons of TNT. It instantly vaporized the ship and everything within a half-mile radius, including the entire Richmond district of Halifax. A pressure wave snapped trees, bent iron rails, and shattered windows 50 miles away. The blast triggered a tsunami that wiped out a local Mi'kmaq community. In an instant, at least 1,782 people were killed, and 9,000 more were injured. Hundreds were blinded by shattering glass as they watched from their windows. Over 1,600 homes were destroyed, leaving thousands homeless just as a blizzard buried the ruins in snow the next day. Number 2. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster, 1986. Our runner-up is a name that has become synonymous with catastrophe, Chernobyl. On April 26, 1986, operators at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Soviet Ukraine were running a safety test on reactor number 4. It was poorly planned, unauthorized, and went against all safety protocols. The goal was to see if the reactor's turbines could power the cooling systems during a shutdown. But a perfect storm of problems was about to cause a global tragedy. The reactor had a known but concealed design flaw that made it incredibly unstable at low power. The operators, who lacked proper training, made a series of critical errors. They disabled key safety systems, including the automatic shutdown mechanism, and pushed ahead even as the reactor became dangerously erratic. When they finally hit the emergency shutdown button, that same design flaw caused a massive, uncontrollable power surge. Within seconds, a steam explosion tore the 1,000-ton steel lid off the reactor core, exposing it to the open air. A second, more powerful explosion followed, shooting a plume of highly radioactive material 9 kilometers into the sky. The initial blast killed 2 workers. Another 28 died from acute radiation sickness in the weeks that followed. But that was just the beginning. Radioactive fallout spread across Europe. The Soviet government tried to cover it up, delaying evacuation and exposing the residents of the nearby city of Pripyat to deadly levels of radiation. While the official long-term death toll is still debated, the United Nations has acknowledged around 4,000 deaths from cancers and leukemia directly caused by the disaster, making it the worst nuclear accident in history. Number 1. The Bhopal gas tragedy, 1984. And at the top of our list is the single worst industrial accident in the history of the world. On the night of December 2nd, 1984, in the city of Bhopal, India, a pesticide plant run by Union Carbide became the site of a chemical apocalypse. The plant produced a pesticide that required an incredibly toxic chemical, methyl isocyanate, or MIC. The gas is so dangerous that the plant was built with multiple redundant safety systems. On that night, none of them were working. A series of cost-cutting measures had turned the plant into a ticking time bomb. The alarms were off. The refrigeration units that kept the MIC stable were shut down. The gas scrubber that could neutralize leaks was deactivated. Sometime after midnight, a large amount of water leaked into a tank holding 45 tons of MIC. This started a runaway chemical reaction, causing the temperature and pressure inside the tank to skyrocket. Finally, a relief valve burst. For nearly 2 hours, a dense, toxic cloud of gas spewed from the tank and drifted silently over the sleeping city. People woke up choking, their lungs on fire. Panic erupted as tens of thousands tried to flee, running blindly through the poison fog. The immediate aftermath was a scene of mass death. Official figures claim over 2,200 people died instantly. Other estimates put the immediate number closer to 10,000. But the dying didn't stop. In the weeks, months, and years that followed, thousands more died from gas-related illnesses. The final death toll is estimated to be between 15,000 and 20,000 people. Over 500,000 survivors were left with chronic health problems, from blindness and respiratory failure to horrifying birth defects in their children. To this day, the abandoned factory has not been properly cleaned up. Its poison continues to seep into the soil and water, a permanent scar of corporate negligence on an unimaginable scale. Conclusion: from explosions that leveled cities to invisible poisons that have left a legacy of death for decades, these disasters share a common thread. They weren't acts of God. They were failures of people. They were caused by cutting corners, by arrogance, and by putting profit ahead of human lives. They are stark reminders that with great power comes even greater responsibility. The lessons from Bhopal, Chernobyl, and all the tragedies we've discussed were paid for with thousands of lives. The question we have to keep asking is, have we learned anything? Which of these disasters do you find the most shocking? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.